All right, once again, listening to O'Brien address an economic development group, but it wasn't just here that he spoke about China. We also have an exclusive one-on-one interview with our very own Fox 10 Kari Lake as she talks to the security advisor about China and 2020 voting and much more. We have that playing for you right here on Fox.
Mr. O'Brien, for spending some time with us. I know you have a very big policy speech you're about to do, and it sounds a little bit like we are putting China on notice.
Well, it's time. For 40 years, we've hoped that by cooperating with China, allowing China special access to our markets, allowing China, turning a blind eye when China steals our intellectual property or abuses human rights, we were hoping that as China became richer, they would become more like us. They'd become more democratic. They'd become more liberal. That hasn't happened, and so the president is leading America, and America's woke up. I think it's bipartisan to the threat posed by the Communist Party of China to the United States, and we're going to stand up to China, and we're going to make sure that America remains safe and secure.
When did this trouble with China start, where we kind of started treating them maybe in a way that enabled them to try to dominate many different segments of the economy and the world?
Well, this has been happening for 40 years. China's had preferential access to the world markets, to the WTO. We've run a huge trade deficit with China. China's improperly subsidized their companies. They put a lot of American manufacturers out of business. And again, our hope was that China would become more democratic, more like us, and the closer we got together, the better it would be. Unfortunately, that hasn't proved to be the case. And so we've got to protect American workers. We've got to protect Americans who want to exercise free speech here in America and not be removed from TikTok, social media, and not be criticized if you're the general manager of the Houston Rockets and want to support the peaceful protesters in Hong Kong. And we're trying to support the people of Hong Kong who are having their freedoms taken away.
It is kind of interesting. You mentioned the NBA when that whole thing broke several months back. It was interesting to watch people, well-known people, come out and really kind of hedge the way they spoke about China. Was that disturbing to you? What were your thoughts on that?
I think it should be disturbing to any Americans. It's bad enough that the Chinese have absolute control over their own people. There's no Twitter in China. There's no Facebook in China. On their social media, it's all fully 100% censored. That's in China. It's disturbing to see that now come to America, to see the Chinese bullying Americans, trying to influence how we speak about our values, about freedom, about liberty, democracy, the rule of law. We can't have China coming here and using its economic might to shut down Americans and how they speak about world affairs.
Do you think it was a bullying that caused people to speak that way, or that they maybe had something in it for them, or was it kind of a...
Look, I think there's a concern with major corporations that are doing business in China. If they don't do it the Chinese way, they'll be penalized. So, I mean, you've seen examples of it. You've seen with United Airlines, American Airlines, Delta Airlines have taken Taiwan off the maps, off their flight maps and the programs that you get in the back of your seat on airlines because China didn't want Taiwan recognized. You've seen Marriott hotels not refer to Taiwan. So this is a long practice. TikTok takes off, and even Zoom have taken off accounts of people here in America who've criticized the Chinese or who aren't sufficiently pro-Chinese. So they've got a long arm, and we're going to stop that.
Do you almost feel as if there's a bit of espionage going on when it comes to a TikTok or a Zoom where they're listening in? I mean, or should people be that paranoid?
We should be very concerned about it. For example, we know that Huawei and ZTE, big Chinese telecommunications companies that are trying to roll out 5G around the world, have back doors, and we know that the Chinese Communist Party and the government will be able to suck up all of your personal information, your medical records, your social media posts, your text, your calls to your wife or your parents, your kids. They can map out your networks, who are you connected with on LinkedIn and Facebook, that sort of thing. All of that can come through these Chinese telecom companies, and so we're taking very aggressive steps to make sure that Huawei and ZTE are not part of 5G in America. And our allies are now starting to follow. You're seeing movements in India, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, France, Poland, the Baltic states have decided that they want trusted telecom providers and not these Chinese companies that can suck up all of our data and put it in the cloud and have it available to the Chinese Communist Party.
That's concerning because I think everyone who's watching, especially if they're working at home, they have been introduced to Zoom and They know their kids are making TikTok videos. Is this to the point where we should be removing those from our devices?
Look, we're taking a close look at it, but I think Americans need to be careful when you're on social media, when you're using apps. You want to use trusted apps. You want to use trusted providers for your telecom equipment. You want to make sure you do all the things you would normally do. Make sure you're updating your operating system and have an antivirus software and all those sorts of things. But no, we have to be very careful, and especially with companies that are affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party and the government of China, we have to be especially careful there.
I want to ask you a couple of real quick questions. In an interview last week with Wall Street Journal, the president said that we're nearing the end of the coronavirus pandemic, although that could be debatable in certain states right now. But he said there's a chance that it was intentional when he was talking about the virus, that it was intentionally perhaps spread. Was that a misstatement by the president, or do you have some evidence that coronavirus was intentionally released to cause harm?
No, Kari, it's a great question. I think what the president's pointing out is that the burden is really on the Chinese, because the Chinese cut off all access to any information about the virus. They refused to allow American CDC doctors to get into China to investigate the virus. They silenced their own doctors. They put people in jail who were blogging, citizens who were on WeChat or the Chinese social media platforms. So they shut down all information about the virus. So the burden is really on them. The burden is, did it come from the lab in Wuhan, the bio weapons lab in Wuhan, or did it come from the wet market? Did it come from a bat? Either one's not great, right? I mean, those wet markets are horrific. But there are just too many things we don't know, because the Chinese have a very closed system, a very controlled, authoritarian, totalitarian system, and they haven't shared the information on the virus with the rest of the world. The Australians have called for an independent investigation of the origin and the spread of the virus. And what did the Chinese do in response? They put an 80% tariff on Australian barley. So they punished the Australians for calling for an investigation.
Wow. So him saying that it was intentionally released maybe could mean a lot of different
Well, we
things.
don't know. I mean, I think the point the president was making is we don't know if it was intentional or unintentional. We don't know if it came from a wet market. We don't know if it came from a lab. There's just too many unknowns about the virus, and the Chinese are unfortunately not open about the origin of the virus. And until we get to the bottom of it, we just don't know.
Okay. The president said China and adversaries could be a threat to the integrity of the election, basically by printing and then flooding the polls with counterfeit mail-in ballots. Do you have evidence of that, or how concerned should we be about that?
Look, we're always concerned, and we know there have been attempts to hack into voter registration databases by foreign adversaries, not just China, but others, Russia, Iran, North Korea would all have an interest in trying to hack our elections. And so we've got a team at the NSC, where I work at the White House, National Security Council, that's specifically focused on election day security. To ensure that the polls are protected, that the cyber is hardened. They're working with the folks at the Department of Homeland Security, who in turn are working with the secretaries of states and the county registrars all over the country. But we have we have 50 states, we have 50 secretaries of states that are in charge of elections, and then there are a lot of county officials involved as well. So we're doing our best to make sure that that whole system is hardened against any attacks by foreign adversaries that would try and influence or interfere with our election on election day.
As of right now, I mean, there are primaries taking place across America. We've got one here in Arizona in August. What's the integrity of that particular election for us, do you think?
Look, we think the secretaries of state from both parties are doing a great job on this front around the country, and the Department of Homeland Security. And these are career professionals. These aren't political folks who are really making a huge effort to ensure the integrity of the ballots. And so far, it looks like folks are doing a good job, and we're proud of them. And I'm confident in our election structure and infrastructure, but it's something we've got to continually keep an eye on, because it's a dangerous world, and there are folks that would like to interfere with our elections. We need to make sure that they know that if they do, it's a red line for the United States. And second, that we have a hardened infrastructure, so it makes it more difficult for adversaries to interfere with our democracy.
But you haven't seen any evidence at this point of counterfeit ballots being printed, or that there's talk of that happening?
So I haven't seen anything on counterfeit ballots, but we know that there are foreign adversaries that are interested in interfering with the election, whether through cyber means. Other adversaries would like to influence the American public or public opinion through Twitter robots and Facebook purchases and things of that nature. So there's a whole array of bad activity for bad actors out there, unfortunately, and we're all doing our best to stay and be watchmen on the towers and watchwomen on the towers and make sure that that they fail in their efforts to influence our democracy. That's for sure.
It was also mentioned, I believe the president mentioned this, that adversaries would be taking advantage of all of the unrest that we're seeing in America. Are you seeing any evidence of funding coming from our adversaries or participation even in some of the criminal activities we saw? Looting, fires. Were there any on-the-ground adversaries taking part in that?
I think most of that is domestic, but what we have seen is we've seen our adversaries amplifying images, amplifying messages on social media, in the media in general, and trying to stir things up, not just here in America, but also overseas, and using video clips and coverage of the unrest here in the protests in the United States to paint America in a bad light overseas. So they're certainly taking advantage of it, and the difference between us and them, and I made this clear on one of the Sunday shows, is we want, everyone here has the right to protest. Everyone has the right to peacefully assemble. We protect that as a government. So we want to stop the looters, and we want to stop those who are engaged in unrest, who are engaged in destruction of property and vandalism. There's no place for that in democracy, but for peaceful protesters, we're all for them. Contrast that with a place like Hong Kong, where peaceful protesters go out and there's no vandalism and there's just peaceful assembly, and they're being shot and bullied. Our adversaries would like to conflate these two things and make us look like them, and we're very different.
You mentioned Taiwan a little bit earlier. I want to ask about the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company building a big manufacturing facility in Arizona. Obviously, this is evidence of a shift, moving the high-tech supply chain home to America. Is this possible to get done in a fast enough time to maybe prevent some of the damage we're seeing?
I think it will. And by the way, I think it's great news for Arizona. I think Arizona could end up being a new Silicon Valley in this whole Phoenix Valley, this whole area. It's great news for Arizona, and congratulations to Governor Ducey and Secretary of State Pompeo and Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin and Secretary of Commerce Ross, all of those who were involved in bringing the Taiwan Semiconductor Company here to Arizona. It's going to create a lot of high-paying jobs and great tech. But what it also does is it brings, as you mentioned, the supply chain for these critical materials that are important for our consumer electronics and everything, the Internet of Things, everything we use every day, but also for our military. And there are a number of important military and aerospace factories here in Arizona. Having those chips made here will make it safer for Americans. So I think it's a great news story for Arizona. I think we're going to see more and more of this. I think COVID really exposed how fragile the supply chain was, that we were relying far too much on the People's Republic of China. I think you're going to see pharmaceuticals moving back. You're going to see tech moving back. I think you're even going to see some of the textile manufacturers and clothing manufacturers moving back, and that's going to be good for Americans who can use those jobs.
When are we going to start seeing that? I keep hearing we're going to see manufacturing come back, which is, and I know we are seeing some of it, especially with, we had to make face masks and
right.
Ventilators during the COVID crisis. Are we going to see it, is it going to be quick and noticeable, or is it more of a trickle?
I think you're going to see some things quick, like the ventilators. I mean, one of the things that, one of the great stories, and I was lucky to have a front row seat in watching how we stood up the ventilator industry. In January, we were being told there's going to be a shortage of ventilators. Hospitals are going to have ethics boards to decide who gets a ventilator, who doesn't. Grandma's not going to get a ventilator. Grandpa's not going to get a ventilator. They're going to go to young people. As it turned out, nobody has been denied a ventilator. We're going to have, by the end of this month, 50,000 ventilators in the national stockpile. And one of the great things that I've been able to do with the president is call our friends and partners and countries that we might not even be close with around the world but are suffering from COVID, and ask them if they need ventilators, and when they say yes, ship these ventilators out. And I think we've got 16,000 ventilators that the American people, at their expense and cost, are sending out to countries around the world, from the Pacific Islands to places like Ecuador and Brazil and Peru, Paraguay, to countries all through Africa, South Africa, Kenya, Congo, other countries, and then our friends and partners in Europe and Eastern Europe. So one of the great things that we've been able to do is make sure we've got enough ventilators to take care of Americans, but also with no strings attached and not asking for anything other than wanting to help people. The American people have sent ventilators all over the world to save lives, and it's and we stood that industry up in a month's time. It's pretty amazing.
Why here in Arizona making this policy speech? I mean, you could have made this from Washington, D.C., New York, Why Arizona?
Look, I think one of the things is we spend too much. I'm not from Washington. I think it's and I'm proud. I'm from the neighboring state next door in California, and I think we spend too much time inside the Beltway. And I think the president wants his senior advisors and his cabinet members to get out around the country. And look, the West Coast is critical for international trade. We're Asia facing, whether it's Arizona or California, Nevada, Washington, Oregon. So we thought it was important to come out here and deliver the speech to the American people and do it in the western coast of the United States. This will be the first of a series of speeches. Secretary Pompeo will be giving a speech on this issue. Attorney General Barr will be talking about China, and FBI Director Wray will be giving a speech all over the next month in different cities around the country. And we wanted to get the message out to the people. And like, there's a little warm this time of year, but there's nowhere better to come than to Phoenix.
Try December or January. Arizona's a lot nicer then. And I just want to ask one more question here. Well, it also sounds like we're really putting China on notice on all fronts.
Absolutely. Look, the American people are wonderful people. We've been very optimistic that as China became wealthy and became rich, they'd become more like us. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And it was because we're optimistic people. We believe in freedom. We believe in democracy. We assume that everybody else is going to want the same thing. And we also were influenced by the experience we had in winning the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Everyone thought that communism was on the scrap heap of history, and everyone thought that except Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party, which are committed to it. And so we're letting them know that the days of America being naive, the days of America kind of turning the other cheek with unfair trade practices and the big trade deficits, the theft of our intellectual property, the misuse of our capital markets, those days are over. Look, we want to have a good relationship with China. We want to trade with China. The Phase 1 trade deal that President Trump negotiated is a good deal. We'd like to see that work out. But we're no longer going to be taken advantage of as a country.
It sounds like, though, it was very accidental how this all happened. Was there any just almost malpractice in the foreign policy that preceded this, and allowing China to gain this kind of dominance?
Yeah, look again. It's a mistake, but it's a mistake that's been made by both parties. Over many years. And President Nixon opened China, and the idea was to have China as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union, and it made geopolitical sense at the time. And we've supported China. And again, we all had this hope that China was going to become more of a democratic country, more of a rule of law country, that they'd stop stealing from us, that they'd stop engaging in unfair trade practices, that they'd stop trying to smother free speech, not just within China, but overseas. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that. So now we have to be clear-eyed. And President Trump has actually talked about this for many years as a business person before he became president. I think it's one of the reasons the American people elected him. He came into office. He put in tariffs on China for the first time in history. And that sent a real message to the Chinese. We stood up to them for the first time, and this is part of a process of standing up to China to make sure that the American people are dealt with fairly.
Final question. I'm so sorry. I'll
That's
make it
okay.
really quick. You took over for John Bolton when he was fired, and obviously he's been making the news right now. I thought it was interesting that in the Wall Street Journal interview that the president did last Friday, he said, "The only thing I liked about Bolton was that everybody thought he was crazy, and frankly, when you walk in the room with him, you're in a good negotiating position because they figure you're going to war if John Bolton was there. He wanted to go to war with everyone. He never saw a war he didn't like." What does it say when the president walks into a room with you?
Well, look, I think, first of all, the president's in charge, and it's the president's foreign policy, and I'm there to advise him and support him to make sure that Donald Trump's foreign policy is implemented. Donald Trump was elected. I wasn't elected. John Bolton wasn't elected. Donald Trump was. And so we want to make sure the foreign policy is implemented. But we've had a real great run of successes recently. I mean, we've signed an agreement that for the most part is holding in Afghanistan that's going to hopefully allow us to bring our sons and daughters home from a war that's been going on for 19 years. And that's going well. We eliminated the #1 terrorist, most wanted man in the world who'd personally killed American hostages, Bakir al-Baghdadi. We've restored deterrence in Iran with the strike on the Quds Force leader. We've made tremendous strides on international organizations. We've gotten out of the Open Skies Treaty, which we were adhering to, but the Russians weren't. And yet at the same time, we've just started arms control negotiations with the Russians on nuclear weapons to make sure that we don't enter into a new nuclear arms race. So I think, when folks see me come into the room, they know that I'm there to support the president's foreign policy, that we're going to great deals done for the American people, and I think the American people are going to elect Donald Trump again, notwithstanding books or other things of that nature, to keep putting them first and to keep getting great deals for them.
Mm-hmm. And if not, if President Trump were to not win, what happens with what we've done with China thus far?
Well, look, I expect the president to win, so I'm not going to talk about those hypotheticals, but I do think there's a bipartisan consensus that's forming around the situation with China, that America had been naive and we no longer are, but I fully expect Donald J. Trump to be reelected and will continue serving as the 45th President of the United States after November.
Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it, and we're going to go listen to your policy speech now. So.
Great to be with you, Kari.
Thank you
very much. Thanks, Kari.
Once again, our very own Kari Lake getting that interview, a sit down with the U.S. National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Just want to say thanks again for being here with us on